Please welcome back to the stage, Joth Ricci.
All right, as we all come back from lunch, during this next section, I'm delighted to say that we'll be hearing from our elected leaders. Like with our U.S. senators, we're going to be asking from their perspective on the big issues ahead for Oregon. We tackled some big stuff this morning. I mean, big stuff. Now we'll be hearing first from our governor, followed by a legislative perspective on Oregon's opportunities and challenges. But before we get to that, you know, it is an event. Most of these events don't happen without our sponsors. And I want to thank all the people that stepped up to support OBC, this event. Not only does it help support the event that we get to put on today, but it helps us support various things that we do throughout the year. So our gold sponsors up there on stage, up on the screen, I won't mention all of them, but thank you to everybody, our silver sponsors here, and then finally, our last group of, maybe they're not going to show it. Okay, we thank our sponsors. So, please give a round of applause to our sponsors, and whenever you can, please support them. They're great Oregon businesses. All right, finally, it's my honor to welcome Governor Brown to the stage. Governor Brown has a long and distinguished record of public service. As a member of the State House of Representatives, the State Senate, Secretary of State, and as our governor. She's accomplished a great deal over her distinguished career as a champion for the most vulnerable among us. With 3 years remaining in her term as governor, I'm sure that she is thinking about her legacy. I think we're all eager to know what's on her mind. Please welcome to the stage our governor, Kate Brown. Welcome.
Good to see you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We are the post-lunch crowd. I hope no one falls asleep. I'm going to be watching intently to make sure none of you are falling asleep.
See, this is the tough, you got to kind of bring it right now because this is the time.
I could certainly challenge the audience to a 5-minute plank.
But don't you need to wait for things to digest before you exercise?
No.
Okay, all right.
I don't.
Okay. All right, listen, well, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us throughout a busy schedule this season. And, I think that obviously I have a lot of questions I could ask the governor, but kind of boiled down to these. And so what I want to start with before we actually get to topics, actually want to talk about leadership for a second. We've talked about leadership today, questions that you ask, the preparation of leaders and how we think about the future. So February 18th, 2015, take you back to that day, you were sworn in as governor. It was a job that you probably always wanted, and you kind of, you actually have that career path that took you to the top. You came into a position during a time of political crisis and change. It's been nearly 5 years, and our state's seen a lot of changes, not just in Portland, but in all of our communities. From a leadership perspective, what's your biggest lesson learned in the last 5 years?
Well, Joth, I think it's fair to say that I've learned a lot of lessons in the last 5 years. Being governor means a lot of what I call metal underpants days, and you just got to go out there and do it. But I think for me, one of the most important lessons, I thought I was a really good listener. I'd been a legislator, I'd been Secretary of State, had the opportunity to work in a number of situations with the diversity of folks, and really thought I could listen well. But what I've learned in this role is not only do you have to listen to people, you have to hear them and incorporate their perspectives, their concerns into the policies that you're making. And a couple of examples come to mind. One is the transportation package that we worked on in 2017, and we're finally able to pass. It was great. But I remember a moment, I'd been meeting with the transportation team to talk about the work the legislature had been doing. It was great. It was bipartisan. It was comprehensive. It was a historic investment. But one of the challenges with the package is it was quite large, and there were a couple of stakeholders that were very concerned about the size of the package, that it was too much money for their stakeholders. And I heard them. I approached the legislative transportation team and said, look, I think this package is too large. I think it's going to end up on the ballot. I think we're going to have to narrow it down. And they said, no. And then a week later, they came back to me and said, you're right. It needs to be narrowed down. And so we all did that together. We modified the package, and we came up with great success. Another recent example, following the 2019 legislative session, I've had an opportunity to meet with a number of stakeholders regarding our climate legislation. But the three that I remember are the folks from Timber Unity, Angela and Jeff and Mike. And they had real concerns about the impact of House Bill 2020 on their lives and their businesses. And as a result of those meetings and those conversations, we've put on the table some modifications to how we would impact transportation. You move in the urban area first, and then you do it in concentric circles. And I think for me, it's so important not only to listen to people, but to hear what they have to say and address their concerns if you want to be successful and if you want to keep the state moving forward.
Love that. Love that. Great lesson, and thank you for sharing that. So let's look ahead a little bit here. We're ending a decade, and I think we're going to start the next decade off with a bang. 2020 is shaping up to be pretty interesting. I think there's more than likely a pretty contentious presidential election on our horizon.
I think that's a fair comment.
That's fair. You have just a small budget session coming up this fall, and then continued discussions about critical legislation that will probably shape our future. With so much activity and maybe some potential distraction on the horizon, as a leader, how do you keep everybody on point and focused and thinking about the things that we need to accomplish?
That's a really good question, and it's a real challenge for someone like me who is so passionate about so many issues that impact Oregonians. But first of all, what I think is most important is that I have a really good team in place, and led by the phenomenal Nick Blosser. I don't know if he's in the audience, but he's truly a rock star, and I feel very fortunate to have him on board. But the other way is that we make a decision on priorities and then put structures in place. And perhaps one of my more successful projects has been our work around our children's cabinet. And we started the cabinet in 2017. For the first time ever, brought together a cross-sector of agencies, the nonprofit folks, the business community. Everybody's been at that table. And the goal of the cabinet has been to create what I am calling a system of early childhood education and care to meet the needs of our most vulnerable families, to make sure they have the support and services they need, and that our children show up to kindergarten ready to learn. And it was this cabinet that created the roadmap for the investment the legislature made in the early childhood education under the Student Success Act. And it's also this cabinet that's going to continue the work around a longitudinal database. How are our families doing over the next decade or so? And how can we provide them with the support and services they need? And this cabinet that will continue to implement the work of the Child Welfare Oversight Board to make sure that we are implementing and changing the culture in our child welfare system. So structures in place, great team. That's how we keep focused.
Keep people on point. Thank you. That's great. So this morning, we had a ton of great speakers and content. One of the key topics, especially of the early part of our morning, was on trade. Not just trade, just sending things across state borders, but really global trade. And I know that you just recently went to Japan and South Korea to talk about what their perspective is on Oregon. What were some of your key takeaways from maybe a global visit?
Well, I think it's really important, and I assume everyone in this room knows, Oregon is one of the most trade-dependent states in the entire country. And given the, I'll just say, uncertainty and instability of federal policies impacting trade, I think it's absolutely instrumental that Oregon and Oregon's leadership continue to build the relationships, the economic, the cultural, and educational relationships that are so key to us continuing our relationships and partnerships. For me, the example is Governor Vicatia. He did a phenomenal job when he was governor, building really close ties to Japan, developing very close both cultural relationships and economic relationships. And those relationships built 30 years ago have really served Oregon well. And I think that is the same type of framework and foundation that we must lay in our relationships with South Korea. And let me just share two quick stories from my visit there. Number one, I had the opportunity to meet with Prime Minister Lee of the country, and I was surprised when he actually took the meeting, but he, when he was governor of a province in South Korea, which is Oregon's sister state, met with me in my first 2 years as governor, and he clearly wants to continue this relationship. Not only did we have a productive meeting, my staff had to literally pull me away. We would still be there talking, I'm sure. So that was a very positive interaction, and I learned a lot from listening to him. Secondly, with Curtis and his team at the Port of Portland, we met with S&M Shipping Company, and the goal was to kind of bring closure to the conversations they've been having. I was able to put some resources on the table, and we have now reached an agreement, thanks to Curtis's leadership, that S&M will begin shipping through Terminal 6. So those are kind of, yes, yay! So those are the kind of relationships and the connections that can happen when you go and meet with people and put resources on the table.
And I think that's important to our future, so thank you for that. All right, so speaking of trade, let's dial it down a little bit, and let's talk about a bridge.
No,
Yeah,
not that
yeah,
one.
we're going to talk about a bridge. So let's talk about regional infrastructure and the renewed discussions for the I-5 bridge expansion. You and Governor Inslee have dedicated $44 million to get the work restarted. Given the outcome from 2013, what's different this time? And why do you think a new bridge is critical not only for our infrastructure, but for business and our long-term economy?
That's a really good question. I think there are a couple of things that are different from 2013. Number one, I believe that both Oregonians and Washingtonians have a better awareness of the need to invest in seismically resilient infrastructure. Number two, since that point in time, Oregon and Washington's economy have been growing very steadily, and that pinch point has literally been a stop sign or a barrier to moving people and products along the West Coast, and we need to fix that. But the third piece, and perhaps most important, is the fact that Governor Inslee is absolutely committed to making this happen. The state of Washington has put, I'll say, more skin in the game than we did, and there's been a change in leadership. And the new leadership, and Governor Inslee, he understands this, that we have to invest in a project that provides mass transit in a way that we can move both people and products efficiently and cost-effectively. So it's time to get this done, and we're going to at least keep the project moving forward.
Good. I think that's great news for everyone to hear. Thank you for that. All right, now we're going to shift gears. How about homelessness? Okay. So we're seeing this trend not only in the metro area, as we're all aware, in our backyard, across the street, on the river, in the Portland area, but also across many of our communities. If I've now, do spend quite a bit of time in Grants Pass in Southern Oregon, we see it in many of our communities around the state. What are some additional solutions that you're exploring to accelerate, I'd say, short-term improvement, but also long-term prevention?
So I think it's absolutely essential that every Oregonian have access to a warm, safe, dry, affordable, and accessible place to call home. Right now, as you've mentioned, we have thousands of people on the streets. It's not just in Portland, it's in every community across the state. We have 22,000 children, school kids, that are homeless or bundled up with other family and friends in their homes or in cars. We have 1,400 veterans that put their lives on the line to serve our country and our state. They deserve access as well. So this is work that we have to do collaboratively and collectively. I can't do it alone. Speaker Kotek can't do it alone, and certainly the Multnomah County Commission can't do it alone. So we're going to need really strong partnerships. Since I've become governor, we've invested over $500 million in affordable housing, homelessness prevention, and rental assistance. And just to give you a perspective, we think this is more than we have invested in the entire history of the state of Oregon in affordable housing, and it is just the tip of the iceberg. So we have got to move forward. So we are doing a number of things, one both in terms of policy and the other piece in terms of funding. We're going to continue to make significant investments. One of the newer solutions is around permanent supportive housing. This means housing with all of the services directly attached. And this is a best practice nationally. It includes alcohol and drug treatment, includes behavioral health, it includes adult basic skills and job training, all right there. And this is one of the best practices we know to getting chronically homeless folks off the streets. The other area looks like tackling housing one-on-one, and there's some wonderful work happening in cities across the state. The other piece is policies. How do we build up, not out? How do we have integrated communities? We know that outcomes for our children are better if our communities are economically integrated. How do we make that happen? And I think some of the legislation that we passed last session is not only nationally groundbreaking, but will move us in that direction. But I do think what is absolutely key is that we work collectively and collaboratively. Oregon has not been a shelter state. We have chosen not to invest in shelters for the last several decades. That probably needs to change. How do we do this in a way that meets our community's needs, not just in rural Oregon, but in urban Oregon? The other piece of this puzzle, and then I'll bring it to a close, is the workforce housing side, market rate housing. The state, under my leadership, we've invested in a handful of pilot projects, and with the help of the Oregon legislature, we're making a $5 million investment in rural accelerator housing. How do we partner with the business community? How do we incent developers across the state to build more housing for the missing middle? We did a great partnership with a developer in Pendleton, built over 70 homes there so folks could not only work in Pendleton, but live, send their kids to school there and shop there. But we need to do more of that. And so we're looking for creative, innovative solutions to tackle what I'm calling the missing middle. Again, this has to be a collective effort, and I know I can count on the business community to help us.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's move to something a little bit more near term, and we have a short session coming up in February. So what are some of your key areas of focus and why for this particular session?
So there are two areas for me that I'm focusing on. Number one, Oregon must move forward on a solution for the climate crisis. And then following the 2019 session, as I mentioned earlier, I've had conversations with a variety of stakeholders about whether the approach we had last session was the right approach. And I am convinced that having a market-based solution with a data-driven cap that provides flexibility makes the most sense for Oregon, for our business community, and our communities around the state. I think what's key is that we do this now in February. The time is right, the economy is good, and I think we can do this and address a number of the concerns that have been raised. What I think is also important is that we continue to do this. We do this in a way that enables Oregon's economy to continue to thrive, that we ensure that we don't exacerbate economic differences between our rural communities and underserved communities, and that we do it in a way that actually achieves results. And there's some really great conversations happening right now, and I'm confident that we can move forward on a proposal in February. The other issue that I'm very committed to focusing on, and I know you have Matt coming later, about a year and a half ago, we convened the Wildfire Council to take a look at what we're doing around fire. Are we doing the right things to prevent wildfire? Are we doing the right things to suppress wildfire? The council has come up with, the task force has come up with a number of recommendations. But for me, what's key is that we make some significant investments in ensuring that our forests are resilient and healthy. We are at the perfect storm. 100 years of federal public land mismanagement and climate change. And coming together, these are producing the very difficult summers that we've had in Oregon. We got a bye last year in 2019, but 2018 and 2017 were really challenging for our people's health, our businesses, and of course our outdoor recreational opportunity. We have an opportunity to invest and make a difference now, and I'm hoping I can work with the legislature and with Matt to make that happen in February of 2020.
That sounds great. Well, thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, final thoughts. You got a room full of business leaders.
Mostly awake.
And maybe a few in here that are pretending that they are. We'll see. You know, it's kind of fun that way. What's a message about Oregon's business climate that you'd like us to walk away with?
Well, I would say generally speaking that our business climate is good. When I am talking to business leaders, whether it's in Pendleton or in Southern Oregon or on the coast, what I hear CEOs tell me is that they are really struggling to hire qualified folks for their workforce. So we have just made the most significant investment in career and technical education and STEAM that Oregon has ever made, fully funding ballot measure 98. So it's so important, yes, yay! It's so critically important that we work together to build a seamless system, that the investments we're making in hands-on learning in our high schools is connected to the needs of the business community in the region, that we're connecting both the high schools, the community colleges, and the universities in all of that work. We know that hands-on learning makes a difference. Just got a stat from the work happening at, in the Umatilla region, Pendleton High School. For Native American students who are in their CTE program, they have a 100% graduation rate. Yeah. For the Salem CTE Center, their graduation rate is 98%. So not only are we graduating our students, we're delivering to the business community a workforce, a skilled workforce, that these students have the tools to compete in a global economy. But we're going to need your help to make sure that that system is seamless and it connects to your needs. So I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. Governor Brown, thank you again for joining us at Summit. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and thank you for your leadership.
Thanks. Great to see you. Thank you.
Walk off.